Absolutely. So, and we do have some news in the NFL. We have that the Arizona Cardinals have hired Monti Ossenfort to be their general manager. They were one of only 2 openings so far. It's interesting because Monty went from Tennessee, which is also an open position, to Arizona to take the spot that was Steve Keim until Steve left for health issues. Thomas, do you have any sort of opinion on that before we move on to tackle here?
Look, I do. I mean, Monty and I worked together. He was on our staff there in New England when we were rolling through some of these younger guys, and they're all stepping up, right? You talk about Rand Carthon, you're talking about Monti Ossenfort. You're talking about that whole group that ran through there. I mean, they were produced in a situation there with Bill Belichick and Scott Pioli and a number of us, John Robinson, Jason Light, and they all learned. And I can't believe here we are. These guys are all stepping up to get their opportunity. Monty is a very astute guy. He's very well studied. He's very thought out in his approach. He has a really good understanding, honestly, everyone, whoever's in that situation there, on how to function well with the head coach. Anyone who's come through New England understands how things are there, right? They understand what's going on there. And I think it's a big, big deal for him to get an opportunity. And I think he's gonna have a really good understanding of how he wants to put it together and how he wants to be side by side with the head coach. This is going to be interesting, though. Who is that head coach going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think in Tennessee, there's not really necessarily a rising star there, right? So it's probably not going to be an immediate. Now, Monty's been around the league a little bit, but there's not necessarily an immediate direct connection with the Titans that he can go with in Arizona. So it's going to be much like when you were hired in 2008. I mean, you got Mike Smith was with the Ravens Jacksonville, right? As the DC before then. So you weren't even connected necessarily there. It might be more like that situation in Arizona, this month. Now, here's a question I have for you, because you've had this situation happen to you directly, right? Where you're hired and then immediately you're tasked with hiring a head coach. How different is that from when you hired Dan Quinn, when you were an established general manager, multiple time executive of the year? That's different, right, than what he's going through. What is going through? I mean, he's got to almost immediately have a plan moving forward to hire this coach, and it's a high stakes situation for them.
He has to be ready 100%. It's unbelievably exciting, right? You go home at night every night up to that point while you're still looking for the new head coach, and you can't believe you have the job finally. B, your family can't believe it, your friends can't believe it, all the people you've worked with over the years not can't believe it, but are so excited. And then you bring yourself back saying, I don't need to look at that. I need to focus on helping this organization be the best. And you honestly cross a line from sort of marvel into being standing up straight saying, okay, they hired me for a reason. And that's because I have a really sound understanding of this game and what I'm going to do going forward. I need to put my best foot forward. I need to be very, very mindful of the type of person we're bringing in as a head coach. I'm speaking from Monty's standpoint. I have to understand that it's also incredibly important to make sure that the assistant groups, the coordinators and the assistants that this head coach potentially brings to the table are really, really sound and are going to work with ownership, Michael Bidwell and the rest of the group. There is a lot on your plate. Believe me, you go to bed at night, usually 1, 2 in the morning, you're up at 6 in the morning and you are rolling. It is not easy. Before you know it, you're at the Senior Bowl. Before you know it, you're at the Combine, and it's just nonstop.
Yeah, by the way, we have a TJ Gonser here repping UWL. Wisconsin lacrosse, my former when I was a professor, my former employer. We love having old Eagles in the chat. No, I like that. And obviously with Arizona, what's nice for Monty is obviously I think expectations will be a little bit lower because of what they're coming off of and what they're dealing with the injury to the quarterback position. But as you said, it's going to be essential to bring in players and because they don't have a ton in the way of resources. They don't have a ton in the way of great football players. It sounds like, DeAndre Hopkins wants a trade, which is going to seem, I think, he's going to have a market. So that's going to, bring you back some players. But obviously it takes away one of the really, core players on your football team. And so there's just a lot to do there. And in a division that, as you said, has the San Francisco 49ers, who are the cusp of that division. You have the Rams, who aren't going to go anywhere now that McVay is returning, and Seattle, who just played in a playoff game. So it's not going to necessarily be trivial for him.
Can I compliment you in bringing this up, and we'll get to it in a minute, but really trying to paint the picture here, because it has a lot of elements to it. Of course, one of the things that we probably should talk about, as I'm jumping around a little bit, is what about those guys that were positioned in the building, who were so-called the favorites to get that GM job in Arizona. That is a big, big deal, man. I'm talking about those guys are really good at what they do. Of course, there had to be a reason. Who knows? Maybe Michael Bidwell's idea was, look, I just want to start anew. I want someone in outside of this group. Think about that. That is not only that, but it also has ramifications of, what's going to be talked about. There's an underrepresented side of that is not coming to fruition. And it's going to be really interesting to see how, the Cardinals handle that. And how those two gentlemen, again, really good football people, what they do. Do they stay there? Do they move on? Does the rest of the staff there, are they miffed because Monty possibly came in, and what do they do? Let's chat quickly about that. That becomes a whole different swirl of information.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, that's a really tough, that's really tough, right? When you bring in, and we're fortunate at Sumer right now that we're building from the ground up, and a lot of us have come in at the same time, but you are going to bring in people at times who are there, who come from the outside. And this is a league, right? We saw with Jeff Saturday, when Jeff Saturday got hired to be the interim coach with the Colts, that was not something that was well received by the people that we talked to. And not to get specific, but it's like, there are people who put in their time. They pay their dues, and again, Monty's not necessarily somebody who hasn't paid his dues, but he hasn't for the Cardinals, right? So, somebody who's, dealt with the intricacies and the idiosyncrasies of the owner, right? Even different teams have different cultures, and you spend a lot of your career, molding yourself to that culture, and then somebody comes and leapfrogs you from the outside. That can lead, I think, to a little bit of consternation and angst. And I, you hope that there are some people that stay there with the players, because that team hasn't been bad. Like Vance Joseph, for example, I'm talking coaches now, not front office. But like Vance Joseph at times has done a really good job at that defense. Does he stay? Is he allowed to build on those relationships he's made? Et cetera, et cetera. It's just really hard. I actually like this question from Jim I posted there when you were talking. How much freedom does a new GM have in establishing a new focus areas, like more analytical approach or department, like possibly Arizona or Tennessee? I'm not, we like a lot of people in both buildings. I'm not breaking any ground here when I say that Tennessee is one of those teams that was not adopting analytics nearly as much as some other teams. And I think I'm going to plug our company here. This is where SumerSports can come in. I've always said that the difference between football and baseball is, if you are 30th in baseball in analytics, you are probably a decade from becoming 5th. In football, you are not a decade away from being 5th. You are some very strategic hires, and as well as strategic vendor team relationships, a la with us, away from being a top 5 adopter. So I think that is obviously providing a lot of opportunity. And we obviously hope Arizona will take us up on it, because, and teams like that, because there is just such opportunity in the NFL. You can create an edge relatively quickly.
Well, both organizations, and I've told you before, John Robinson is a very good friend of mine, and I think he's really good at what he does. Of course, they made the move, unbeknownst to many of us in the league. But their approach was not cutting edge as far as, maybe what Eric DeCosta is doing, or Howie Roseman, or Andrew Berry. There was an element of old school there. I guarantee you, who am I to say this, of course, but I can almost guarantee you that if Ryan Cowden stays with Mike Vrabel, who's a very smart guy, they're going to take a deep breath and start thinking about what is around the corner, what's on the front end of the curve that they need to tap into to see what can help them be better. a la you're talking about SumerSports. Anything analytic wise to make more exactness to the team building is very important. I would say the same thing on the Cardinals side. I mean, Steve Keim is, I've said this time and again, and people can have whatever they want to say. This, the health reasons are unfortunate, but a really, really good football evaluator and understander of that. But again, an organization that wasn't on the front end of the curve as far as that was their desire, right? Now Monty comes in. Monty's a bright guy. Monty's going to have to take that element, I'm sure, sit down with Mr. Bidwell, talk about what's next, think about who they're bringing in. Who knows? We don't know this right now. There could be someone waiting in the wings, maybe used to coach for the Saints. You never know, and they're going to be relying on Monty to carry the torch, so to speak, on a lot of different areas that maybe Sean Payton, if that were to be the case, hypothetically, is not. That's not his world at this point, even though Sean's a very front thought thinking guy. But this is a big thing. How does this play out for Monty? And what is Monty going to be in that organization? Is he going to be GM with the power and the strength? We call it respectfully. Or is he going to be a GM light for the first 2, 3, or 4 years? You never know that. GM light doesn't necessarily mean the GM doesn't have final football say. You could not have final football say and still not be considered a GM light. We could go on and on talking about that another time, another place. But this whole thing fascinates me, how this is going to play out and who is going to be at the helm at both of those.
I mean, this is team building in every sense of the word, right? And obviously we think of football teams as the players on the field, and we're going to talk about that in a minute or two here. But it's also about team building within the organization. And I also think much like if you're drafted to be a backup quarterback, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be one your entire career. Look at Russell Wilson, look at Kirk Cousins, look at guys like that. Just because you may have to assume a GM light role early doesn't necessarily mean you won't be able to assert your stamp on the team as much as other guys. I think of Brett Veach, who was very much put in place in Kansas City because Andy Reid won the power struggle, and power struggle is too heavy of a word, but one, Andy Reid stayed, John Dorsey went, Brett Veach assumed that role, and because of his, frankly, his competence and how well he's done in many ways, has earned what I would consider to be a powerful role in Kansas City, and that can happen for anybody in that role. And so it doesn't mean don't take that position. It just means have expectations that are reasonable there. So it's so fascinating. I can't wait to see what Tennessee does with their job, and I can't wait for this offseason to talk about teams maybe on their second year of a GM. I feel like we can fill up an entire podcast with the difference between what Kwesi has to deal with in Minnesota and Ryan Poles has to deal with in the division rival Chicago Bears, given their different initial conditions and what has happened this year with the Vikings winning 13 games and the Bears winning 3 games.